In a fascinating and compelling parallel, we find that in this week's biblical chapter, a reference not once but twice to Hamas. The chapter begins, the world was filled with Hamas, which means crime, robbery, violence. While we're being rudely reminded how this Hamas simply does not go away in Gaza. What can we learn from events that happened back thousands of years ago? The Great Flood as a result of human corruption and crime. What can we learn from that in today's times? What can we do? And it's mind-boggling, tragic, how 2 years since October 7th, and this quagmire, this quicksand, cannot be resolved. Yes, we celebrate that the hostages, the remaining 20 living hostages, were released. But what can we do in some permanent and lasting, sustainable way to deal with this Hamas and to finally achieve peace? So please join me in this very timely and important conversation. The never-ending flood in Gaza. Build yourself an ark. Simon Jacobson here, and we'll be discussing the never-ending flood in Gaza. Build yourself an ark. This program is dedicated by Freda Tiffenbrunn in memory of her late father, Rabbi Yosef Weinberg, Olav HaShalom. The contrast is so stark and so glaring. Look how Israel was able to deal with Hezbollah. If you remember the pagers and beepers, the fall of Syria, the Houthis in Yemen, and Iran. Everyone thought, who knows? And literally, without any casualties, without any planes being shot down 1,400 miles away, with precision, they were able to neutralize and destroy a big part of the nuclear facilities, military personnel in Iran. And yet, in stark contrast, look at Gaza. Just literally feet away from Israel. With all the technology, the tragedy and the brutal atrocities that happened October 7th, but then 2 years. And you think, with such a sophisticated military, Israel should be able to have cleaned it up. Yet it took 2 years to gain back the release of all the hostages, many, many casualties, many deaths, in addition to the 1,200 brutally murdered 2 years ago, the soldiers, and including the innocent people in Gaza as well, however you define innocent. And it's still not over. Hamas. You open up this week's chapter in the Torah, the chapter of Noach, the second chapter in the book of Genesis. And it strikes you immediately. Fascinating, compelling, gripping. A verse that God saw the world got corrupt. But how does it define corrupt? V'tamoleh ha'aretz chamas. The world was filled with crime, with Hamas. Spilled like Hamas. Pronounced a bit differently. And it means crime, violence, robbery. The different opinions of how far it went. But it was basically everything you're seeing going on right now in Gaza. And then it repeats again, Kimola Oretz Chamas, because the world was filled with crime, with violence, corruption. So God finally said, we need to cleanse this world. People have destroyed themselves. And then comes the great flood. But people misunderstand, the flood was not a punishment. The flood was a way of cleansing. That when people destroy themselves, they self-destruct. The only way in self-defense is to protect yourself. And God was protecting his world from the corrupt forces that have now dominated and overwhelmed everyone else. But he told Noah, build yourself an ark and save your family and the creatures of this world. 2 of every species, 7 of the other species. Because the point was to rebuild the world, not to destroy the world. And he used water, 40 days, corresponding to the 40 cubits of a mikveh. A mikveh is a ritual bath. And then a new world was built. The world we know today was built after that flood. So we see the depths of how far people can fall in corruption and crime, in selfishness and greed, destroying themselves, destroying everyone around them, corrupting others that were innocent. But then we see also the hope. So you read that verse, those verses, the beginning of this chapter in the Bible, thousands of years ago, you can't help but see, there you have a parallel to events today. God promised he would not bring another flood to destroy the world. But that doesn't mean that we don't have to deal with the enemies and the forces of evil that seek to destroy. It's exactly what Hamas has done, as their name suggests. I don't know what the word means in Arabic. But let's focus on what we can learn from this. So the first thing we learn is that yes, humans have free will. The free will was given as a gift for them to transform the world and turn it into a beautiful world. But unfortunately, free will means you can also choose to do the opposite. And we cry for that. We cry for people falling into that, to those depths, to that low point, where hatred, death, and darkness becomes a culture. But that does not in any way deter us. That does not in any way cause us to retreat in fear. It means we have to dig deeper and bring out more light and more love and more beauty. Yes, we have to fight our battles. The evil has to be destroyed unless it figures out a way to unconditionally surrender and repent and correct its ways. But if not, sometimes, yes, a flood is unleashed with the intention of bringing peace, not the intention of vengeance or murder or killing. On the contrary, it's to bring peace. When a war is brought upon you, like it was in World War II and other times, that's the only healthy thing to do. To ignore it, to bury your head in the sand, deny it is not a solution. Appeasement, as Churchill said, is feeding the crocodiles in the hope you'll be eaten last. That's not an approach. Just pushing it off. It's calling a spade, clarity. An enemy has declared war against you. Yes, they have one option: to undeclare it, surrender, or change your ways. And if not, yes, they have the ones that declared the war. That doesn't mean we're happy about it, but it means we have to deal with it. But then comes, perhaps even more important, build yourself an ark. Now, what I'm suggesting here and sharing is not just about Gaza. It's also a lesson in all our lives. But we'll begin with that actual geographical location. It's fascinating as well that Palestine originates from the word Philistine. Not necessarily the same people, they don't necessarily descend from there as has been documented, but the name, Plishtim in Hebrew. And we have Plishtim from the beginning of time, in time of Abraham already. And in later generations that showed their adversarial intentions to be the enemy of the Israeli people, of Israel and the Jewish people. The story of Samson, story of Goliath and David, all come from Eretz Plishtim, which includes and primarily the land of Gaza. What does the word Plishtim mean? It comes from a word called openness. Sounds very innocent. But openness means no boundaries, no structure. Open from all sides. And that's exactly what Gaza is, if you look at it. So it was always a strategic place in history, at the crossroads between Asia, Israel, Africa. But it was never determined who actually controlled Gaza. There was a time it was part of Israel, but then there was a time it was not. And it's interesting, our enemies tried to call certain parts of Israel, Palestine, Syria, Palestina. But the Jews never used that term for Israel. Because Palestine, as I said, suggests something. It suggests a lack of discipline, a lack of boundaries, lack of parameters. So on one hand, openness is very good. But openness without structure creates problems. And you say Yishmael, the son of Abraham. The Torah describes him, Pera Adam, a wild man. Yodeh Bakel v'yad kol boy. He had no boundaries. A lot of kindness, a line of chesed, but without boundaries, like water itself, that can flood. So it's not a surprise. Crime at the end of the day is a lack of boundaries. Not trying to minimize it, but it means the boundaries of people's lives, not to hurt someone else, not to take away someone's property, robbery, theft, is boundaries. Obviously there's a need to share, there's a need of a give and take, but all with boundaries. When you lack boundaries, it becomes destructive. That's why in the Kabbalistic and mystical meaning, Plishtim, Philistine, is connected with mockery, with jest, cynicism. Yes, cynicism, comedy. So there's innocent comedy, but then there's comedy that's cynical, that laughs at things, that mocks at things. So on one hand, it's lighthearted, but it could also be destructive. The other extreme is the opposite, no laughter at all, sadness, depression, darkness. But enough openness without boundaries also creates darkness. There's a separation between day and night, between light and dark, between good and evil. Ultimately, as the world became corrupt on that level, there was only one way to deal with it. Because it's one thing when you know here is a moral clarity, there's moral and ethical behavior, and here there isn't. So at least you see the boundaries. But when it gets all mixed up like a snowball effect, we know that's the biggest problem at all. And psychologically, the same idea. That's why abuse coming from someone that's close to you, a loving person, meaning a person that's supposed to be loving, a family member, is the worst. Because on one hand, they love you, the next day they hurt you. So it's one thing, a stranger, so a stranger, you're not expecting love from a stranger. But from a family member, and the child gets confused. What's right, what's wrong? They start feeling that love always comes with pain. And all the other confusions that an impressionable mind and psyche is traumatized by. So the solution to that is you have to cleanse. You have to call a spade a spade. This is right, this is wrong. And the corrupt forces have to be eliminated. Unless, of course, they repent. And keep in mind, Noah was told to build the ark, but it took a while. Because God wanted the people to repent. That was the goal. When they didn't, that was the last resort. But then comes the second half. It's not just about destroying the cancer, the chamos, but it's also about building an ark. So as the floods raged, the flood waters raged, there's a way to protect yourself. In Hebrew, the word teva is the word used in this chapter, an ark. Now teva, there are other words in Hebrew for ark, for a boat. Aniya, sfina. Here teva. Teva, says the Baal Shem Tov. Teva means a word. What does a word have to do with it? So he says, it's the holy words, the sacred words of prayer and study that insulate you and protect you from the raging floodwaters of a corrupt world. Of all the forces that cause us to be anxious, that cause us to be traumatized, that bring on insecurity, fears, inhibitions, the teva is what protects you. And indeed, it protects you in a way, now you escape, you're riding on the waves. So it creates this like insular armor. So the waves are raging, but you are able to ride the waves. And the waves, as they lift you as well, interestingly. So it's not just you're avoiding it, you're harnessing it. And that's what Noah, for 40 days and 40 nights with his family and the animals, saved them, and they were able to rebuild the world. What is the ark in Gaza? So firstly, dealing with the darkness is the flood, is what you need to do, what you need to do. When an enemy attacks, you can never show weakness. Appeasement. You have to face it. But at the same time, you build an ark. And let me tell you a personal experience of how I've seen this ark played out. After the war broke out, after October 7th, so based on a suggestion from actually someone in the IDF military, we published a special edition of 50,000 books of Torah Meaning for Life in Hebrew. It's called Haderech L'Chaim Shel Mashma'ut. Special edition, l'schut, l'merit, in merit of the Tzahal, of the military, of the Tzava, Haganah Yisrael, IDF. And we gave them out personally in 50,000 books. We didn't do it in boxes and mass distribution, individually, hand to hand, person to person distribution. At the time, around over a year and a half ago, I was in Israel. I was invited down to one of the military camps near Gaza, near Hamas, called Sa'alim. It's an army base. And it was right before the soldiers were going in with tanks to Rafah, or Rafia as it's called in Israel, which is the southern part of Gaza. There's a whole, if you remember, controversy around it. So here I was with these young 20-year-olds, innocent. You had to see the joy, the unity. You couldn't tell. Everything you hear in the media is fantasy. Made up. People, young people. And with full joy, ready to protect at the risk of their own lives, because anything could have happened to them once they entered, to protect the innocent men, women, and children of Israel. It was so emotional. They asked me to share a few words, which I did in Hebrew. And I said, I'm embarrassed, ani mitbayesh, to stand before you giborim, before the heroes. I spoke in Hebrew. And I shared a few words from the book. We gave out the books. You should see how they gathered. They gathered around me. And a few of them told me that we've read this book. We got it together with tefillin, mezuzah, and they said that's what protects us. Yes, we have military gear and helmets and everything to protect us, and tanks and different weapons and different ammunition and so on. But the spiritual protection. And there I saw the ark with my own eyes. They all have arks. Is their attitude. Is the mitzvah, the good deeds they do. It's the love they have. And it's the spirit, the courage, the confidence that we're fighting the right cause. Without hate in their eyes, without anger, without vengeance, without fear. Because they knew they were standing for something. Of course, we'd rather they'll be back home with their families, peacefully eating dinner and celebrating. But they understood the moment of the mission. It was a flood. But they had their arcs in place. And therefore they would come out intact. Unfortunately, some didn't come out intact physically. But spiritually, yes. We have to remember every battle fought, especially when you're engaging with the enemy, requires a spiritual component as well. And that spiritual component is your faith, is your strength, is your confidence, is your trust. You trust in each other, you trust in God. And it gives strength, it gives tremendous strength. Never underestimate that. And there's so too in a microcosm in each of our lives when we face our floods and our raging flood waters. Whether it's concerns and anxieties over personal matters, psychological issues, and fears. Whether it's family matters, spouse, marital, children. Whether it's financial matters, the anxieties of making a living. There are many things, especially in our uncertain world, with all our blessings, there are many, many floods. So when we have to deal with an adversary, we have to deal with it. But above all, build your ark. Build yourself an ark before you even begin, before the flood begins. That ark is your family, is your values, is your faith, your commitments, your kindness, your tzedakah, your charity. In the last few years, I've been talking about immersing yourself in a spiritual spa. I know a spa and a flood is not exactly, but they're both water. And a spa is an acronym. Study, prayer, action. The words of study, the words of prayer, and the words of action, well, more than the actions of action, I should say, are an arc. Cognitive, emotional, and behavioral conditioning. Study, prayer, action. Every day. Begin your day. Before the challenges begin. With reading something spiritual. A book. Anything that stimulates, that gets your mind into a more sublime place, more transcendent place. Say a prayer, a poem, a psalm, a hymn. Anything that stimulates your emotions spiritually. And finally, behavioral. Do a good deed. Give a little charity, monetary charity, a word of kind word, words of compassion, support. You can do this in person, you can do it online. That builds an ark, that insulates and protects you and allows you to ride the waves of life, the vicissitudes, the ups and downs. So, will the never-ending flood in Gaza end? Absolutely. It's never-ending because it's open-ended. Plishtim. But if we apply the right discipline on ourselves and on others and insist, yes, the Hamas surrender entirely, just like the Germans had to surrender at the end of World War II and the Japanese. And then we can start building something. And at the same time, build ourselves the arcs we need. That's how we ultimately end this flood and come out stronger than ever with the arcs that we have built. And then we can build a new world. Olam Chadash. That's what Noah and his family built, a new world. A world that would yield 10 generations later, Abraham, who would be a light that would pioneer monotheism, morality and values, human rights, everything we know and cherish today came out of the world post the flood. So we learned our lesson. We learned how bad and how destructive humans can become, but we also learned how humans can rebuild. And as the arcs that help preserve us and protect us as we ride through the waters of history and the flood waters in each generation, including our own. To the point that we transform Mola Aretz Chamas, a world filled with crime, with robbery, with violence, to Mola Aretz, another Mola Aretz, another world filled with water, but this time as Isaiah says, there will be no longer evil and destruction in this world because a world filled with divine knowledge. That's what replaces Mola Aretz Chamos. Chamos is replaced by Mola Aretz Deis Hashem, divine knowledge. Kamayim layom achasim, like the waters cover the earth. A flood, but a very different sort. A flood that demonstrates how divine knowledge, how spirituality and transcendence consumes us. And the material world, just like the seabed becomes covered up entirely by the waters of divine knowledge, as the waters, by the divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. That's the end story, my friends. May we merit to see that immediately. And the more we do in that effort in our personal lives, we bring the divine knowledge into our personal lives through the arcs we build. That microcosm has that ripple butterfly effect that affects the entire world. And one good act, and one good word, and one good thought in our spiritual arcs tips the scales and brings personal and global redemption. Thank you. This has been Simon Jacobson. MeaningfulLife.com is our website where you can find a wide array of resources, spiritual resources, life skills. You can use our AI tools now to find everything that you were looking for. Please take advantage of it. Please subscribe to our offerings. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Share if this has been meaningful to you with others. And always, I look forward to your feedback, your comments, and your thoughts. Be blessed and be well. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Meaningful Life Center. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at meaningfullife.com/donate.